like when it comes to color, as you can see there, there's a lot. Now, when it comes to the embossing glazes, we don't have all the colors, but we do have a lot of colors. When it comes to crayons, we have all of the colors except the newest, Kit Flamingo, and then we also have some metallics in there. So both of these mediums are really completely different, but they also kind of work together. So that's why I thought they would be great in the same demo. So swatches. This is something now, I haven't updated this one. This is an older one, so it doesn't have any of the new colors that we did from last year or this year. But this is something you can get on Ranger's website. You can print it out. I just printed mine out on watercolor paper because my printer can handle that, but definitely put it on whatever. If you can't print it on watercolor paper, I would probably, I don't know what I would do, because I really prefer swatches on watercolor paper for something that is water reactive, like the crayons. And then when it comes to my swatches for the glazes, I wanted to do swatches over a stamped image, because we'll talk about that, how it really intensifies the color of what you put it on. And then I also wanted to put that onto paper dolls. These happen to be the baseboard dolls. These are the thicker ones. These have been retired, but paper dolls would be the same thing, just so you can see kind of their tinting properties. And we're going to get into each one, and like I said, there's going to be times where they're going to work together, but I'm going to start with a demo focused on the glazes, and then that will lead us into a demo on the crayons, all right? And so throughout the Q&A demo, if you can do me a favor, and that is really try to keep the questions relating to the topic that we're doing this week, right? I know that there's people that join the lives all the time, and they just, you know, they have an agenda, they have their own questions. But for this particular series, it's about highlighting a specific product category, all right? So this is going to be it. So both products, both the crayons and the glaze, you can keep in the distressed crayon storage tin, right? You can store them however you wish, but the storage tin for the crayons, they're just designed to fit the crayons that you can just dump out, because these were sold in a kit initially, and I took them out of those little pouches, and I like the fact that they're in a tin so I can dig around for my colors. But these jars, these storage jars, these jars are actually sold empty, as well as the jars that come, that the glaze comes in, but you can fit 12 in here. Now they do fit kind of snug, right? Because the tin wasn't designed for it, but it sure fits it. So I happen to like that. So that's where I keep my glazes. Because we have new colors, I needed to go to another tin. And for right now, I just have my embossing accessories in there. But really, you kind of do you when it comes to storage. So first we're going to talk about the glaze. We'll talk about the products that you need for the glaze, and we'll kind of go from there. So the thing about distress embossing glaze, what makes it what it is? Well, first of all, it is an embossing powder. Okay, that's really what it is, an embossing powder. So that just means it is ground up plastic, and when this melts, it becomes a solid. But usually in the world of embossing powders, now not all of them, right? I'm just saying usually embossing powders in the world of powders are opaque, okay? Opaque meaning if you were going to stamp with embossing ink, if you were going to use an embossing dabber, if you were going to use an embossing pen, or if you were going to use ink pads or anything like that, and we stamp an image and we pour embossing powder over the top and we heat it and we melt it, this is usually what we get, whether it's black embossing powder or white or metallic or whatever. And these are all of Ranger's colors. They have many, many more. But this is the norm. Now, I'm saying the norm because there are translucent powders out there. Sometimes you'll find a random color that happens to be a translucent base. But pretty much in the industry, most of them are going to be opaque like this, which means that when you melt it, as you can see, you cannot see through them. That's their purpose, really, because they're supposed to highlight whatever that is, right? Okay. But the glaze, this is a line specifically designed that all the colors are translucent, which means if we did the same swatch, and this is just starting with an inked background, taking the dabber, swiping some of that embossing ink, putting the powder on and heating that, you can see that these colors, besides that they're distressed goodness, they're also translucent. So all of that great pattern and design that we're getting from our inked background is visible through the glaze, right? It's still an embossing powder, same embossing powder, but most embossing powders are opaque. Glaze, they're all translucent. And they're translucent with a light touch, I should say, because even some translucent powders are really dark and you can't see through them. So we actually made them a little bit lighter than the actual color, because we still want that to, you know, be reminiscent of the color, look at that and go, okay, that's cracked pistachio, but I love the fact that we can see through that. And because these are translucent, and you're gonna see that through the demo, is that when you're working on these, the background, the surface that you work on, of course, is going to impact the color of the glaze. Because like ink, it's translucent. So if we work on a light background, the color is going to be brighter. If we work on a dark background, that color is going to be slightly darker. Okay? And we're going to get into embossing, do's and don'ts, heat tools, all that stuff. This is just so you understand what we're talking about. Okay? So when it comes to working with embossing powders or embossing inks, you really have a choice of how you want to use them. You can stamp, cover that image with the embossing glaze and heat it, or you can stamp a background, like in this case on these tags, I stamped that text in black archival, let it dry, and then again, I took the dabber, and I'll talk about the different inks you can use, swipe that, and then poured the glaze over the top. And what I like to see, look at this, look, that's the new pine needle. Oh God, I love that color. Because even the dark green, so we can see the detail of his little suit. So by using this, we're able to apply color. Now, between these two, this is weathered wood and speckled egg. You'll see if you do a swatch, the difference in that, right? Weathered wood's going to be a little grayer and speckled egg is going to be that little brighter blue. And that's why it's important to do a swatch. And you can do whatever you want for your swatches, completely up to you. It's just important to kind of understand what those colors do before we get started, okay? So first things first, the basics. So when it comes to basics, I'll just take a piece of, I think I'll just do a piece of white. Let's do that. White mixed media heavy stock. It doesn't really matter what you want to work on, okay? These tags I die cut with my Sizzix die out of watercolor paper because that's what I wanted to use. Probably now I would die cut them out of the new heavy stock, or if you want to make bigger swatches. My friend Dina Wakely, she actually has white tags. So this isn't as thick as the heavy stock or the watercolor, but they're a nice weight. I would say they're similar to the Distress mixed media tags, but they're in white. And I knew she had some tags, but I saw an email from Ranger that you could get tags in bulk of Dina's. Check this out, right? So these are number 10s. These are really big. These are number 8s. You can get like 50 packs. So I ordered them and had them here for the demo. So throughout the series, I'll be showing some stuff on white as well as the mixed media, which is a little creamy, all right? So you can do your swatches on whatever you want to work on. So when it comes to working with embossing powders, what's important to remember is that you need something for the powder to stick to in order to heat it up. All right, I'm just going to take some colors right now. Definitely want to take a little brown because that's just who I am. I'll just push these off to the side of the media mat for right now. We'll move our swatches over here. So you need something for the powder to stick to, because if you just pour the powder on the paper and you turn on a heat tool, the powder is going to blow off, right? What can you use to make this powder stick? Well, there's a lot of things. The normal is going to be like an embossing ink, and that could be Distress embossing ink, regular embossing ink, Versamark. There's a lot of clear inks that are embossable. And the benefit of these clear inks, or what makes them embossing inks, so to speak, is that these are glycerin based. And because it has glycerin, it kind of has that oily feel, and it stays wet the longest, right? That's why people like to use them for embossing, because you can put that down and you have more open time to stamp an image, get your powder on, and melt the powder, right? So that's pretty much the go-to. But there are other embossable inks. Pretty much any ink that's going to stay wet long enough on a surface to apply your powders, you can emboss with. Meaning you can emboss with Distress ink, you can emboss with Distress oxide, you can even emboss with archival ink because it's oil-based. But your surface is pretty important as well, because, for example, if you use watercolor paper and your ink soaks in too quick, you're not going to be very successful embossing with regular ink pads. So just play around. But a good go-to is going to be clear embossing ink. Now, the nice thing about clear embossing ink, well, it's clear, which means I could use it on regular white cardstock, or I could use it over something. And because it's a clear ink, it's just going to kind of be that barrier that allows my powder to stick, which is what I've used here. And there's different ways that we can apply this ink. It could be a traditional ink pad. So if you're going to stamp, you would just go ahead and use clear embossing ink from an ink pad. This is an embossing dabber. This is nice. You can tell my dabber really gets put to use. It's a thick ink in here, guys. Remember, it's glycerin based. So think of it like, I want to say almost like liquid soap, like glycerin soap. It's thick. So this dabber that's here, okay, it's got that little fabric. You have to make sure that this dabber is pressed down on your surface so that valve opens, and it allows you to apply the glaze or the embossing ink. Now, the ink is not going to come out really thick like paint. It's going to be very, very thin, and you have to just apply pressure while you press down. If you squeeze this too much, you'll blow the top off. And if you add too much ink, well, that's a mess too, because the glycerin will actually make your powder separate. And sometimes people have done that where they're trying to emboss over a surface. So let's say they're just applying ink and they just put so much on there that when they put their embossing powder on and it melts, it actually starts to become kind of like little fragments and separates. That's because it's floating on top of that glycerin. So don't over ink your surface. Now, how do you know if you have ink on there? Well, that's a challenge really, because this is supposed to be clear. But if you kind of tip it to the light, there I'm trying to show you just a little bit, you can see a little reflection, and that's all you need, really. A little goes a long way when it comes to embossing ink. So I'm just showing you from the dabber. I just press down and I really just drag this over the top just to get some ink on there. Another great thing, if I know I'm going to be doing backgrounds with that flat top, I'll keep that upside down so it like brings all the ink to the front, kind of the sludge. Then we're going to apply the glaze. So let's do a color, let's do something a little bright. We'll do broken china, okay? When we're applying the powder, if you're working on a glass mat, just a little tip, work on something that's going to catch your powder. So here's what I do when I'm embossing. I like to work in a splat box just for powder, just because I don't like to get powder all over the mat. It just gets a little kind of gritty or sandy, but it's okay if it does. I'll show you a tip for that. But this is going to allow me to take the powder, generously pour it on, right? Don't sit there, you know, with like a little shaker. Generously pour it on, tap it off, okay? And I just tap either on the table, use my finger. I don't like to be a flicker, right? Because if you're a flicker, you're going to go from having a nice coverage to having sparse coverage. Now, you notice it because it's a solid area, but so many people are flickers when they're doing stamped images, and you don't really notice how much you flicked off until you go and emboss it. But see, that ink is going to stay wet. It's going to allow me to put the powder back on. But yeah, many flickers don't realize how much they flicked off until they go and emboss their image, and they're like, oh, it's a little, you know, kind of skippy. Maybe I didn't get enough ink or whatever it is. Now, pretty much because, well, you're a flicker and you flicked it off. So don't, if you can avoid that. So I'm working on wax paper. That's just going to allow me like a kind of, well, I'm doing it upside down just so you guys can see it. There you go. See, it just makes it easier for me to put the powder back, but you can use copy paper, scrap paper, whatever that is. There's still more powder there, but for the sake of the demo, I'm not going to worry about it. All right, so we have powder. Now powder is only powder, and it will remain powder until you melt it. Okay, so if you touched it right now, it would come off. If you flicked it, it would come off. But now we need to heat emboss it to melt it. So a couple of things that we can do. I'm not going to do this for the demo, but normally when I'm working, I would emboss in my splat box as well. I would take out this piece of wax paper and I would emboss in the splat box. And the reason I do that is because sometimes when you're embossing, you do get those little bits of powder that blow off, and the splat box will catch it because it's got those walls. And then that's why you see a lot of embossing powder in there, because I like that. For the sake of the demo, I'm just going to work here. If you work on your media mat and you happen to get embossing powder or glitter or whatever onto this glass, the static charge just makes it want to stick there. So here, I'm just going to use a Swiffer to get off any excess powder. Okay, that's it. Moving on. Someone talks about bottle hard to squeeze. Well, that's because you're really not supposed to squeeze it. It's not a squishy bottle. It's just designed to hold and add pressure. That's all it is. It's just about pressure. So whatever force you can squeeze is going to be enough to provide momentum for that ink to move. We don't want it in a soft squishy bottle like paint, right? Because if you were to squish it, you have too much ink coming out. So the density of this bottle, you can hear that hard density, it's designed that way, but it still allows you just to apply a little bit of pressure. You see that little give? That's all we're doing, okay? So it's not a squeezy bottle by design. Keep that in mind. So we're going to talk about heat tools, because if you've watched any demo, you know that I have two different heat tools because, well, they do two different things. Ranger's Heat It Craft Tool is for crafting. It's for drying ink, for drying paint, for drying glue, for drying stains, for doing all that. Can you emboss with it? Yeah, but it takes way too long because although these are the same temperature, heat-wise, this one diffuses heat because of that fan design in that large opening. This one directs heat. Right? So by directing that temperature, it's going to melt my powder quicker. Okay? So that is why I use an embossing gun for embossing. And because it directs heat, I don't like to use an embossing gun for ink because an embossing tool also has a higher fan speed than the Ranger Heat It Craft tool. So that's why I have two tools, and I say it over and over, but again, you do you. So when it comes to embossing, everyone has a different level of sensitivity to heat. Okay? Maybe you can hold on to your paper. Maybe you're one of those that can't. If you have just a wooden clothespin, that makes it really easy because it gives you something to hold and gives your distance. You don't want something that's going to conduct heat, so you wouldn't want a metal clamp. You also wouldn't want plastic because you wouldn't want anything that's going to melt with heat. So if you're sensitive to that, a clothespin is really nice, especially for smaller areas. But here's my tip to emboss. First, you're going to turn this on. And we want this to heat up for just a few seconds. And then whenever you're embossing, if you can, try to hold that material, whatever it is, off of the surface, okay? Because if I have it on my glass mat and I'm trying to emboss it, I've got to get enough heat where this entire surface is also hot so it radiates heat back up. By holding my paper up, it's going to allow my heat to pass through it, and I'll try to get as close as I can so you can see it. And so this gives me about 1 inch away. And by allowing the heat to pass through it, you'll see that it embosses just almost instantly. There you go. You can see it's embossed. And you just follow it around. So that is why I like to do that. Another reason why I like to hold my paper up is because it eliminates curling. Okay? I'm not going to say the paper doesn't curve at all because obviously we're heating it. But if you've ever worked on flat paper, right? And you place it on your table and you heat it, it starts to curl up. Why? Heat rises, right? So if you're heating the surface, the heat is going through the paper and it's trying to come out. So usually it's heating the sides to where your card ends up looking like this when you're done embossing instead of flat like this. If that's the case, you can just flatten it out. Paper doesn't have a memory, okay? But that's just a little tip to not only get the embossing to emboss quickly, but also eliminate curling. And that's it. That's the beauty of glaze, right? If you're going to use a stamp, it would be the same thing. You'd ink up the stamp, you'd stamp, you'd pour your powder on it, and off you go. If you're going to do a pen, okay, same thing, we can do a pen. So let's talk about the pen and what we can do with embossing. We can work with paper dolls. I love the paper dolls. This is the new cast of paper dolls. I love them. There's so many different ones you can work with, large and small. Some of them are going to have dark clothing. This shows her she has light clothing. So there again, depending on the color of clothing is also going to help determine the color of glaze, right? So for example, we'll do her in Tattered Rose. We'll do her in this color, right? If we worked with Tattered Rose and the surface was dark, that pink is not going to look very pink or rose, I should say. It's more peachy than, say, Kitsch Flamingo. So for example, on this one, you can see I chose Kitsch Flamingo because her coat was darker. So really choose kind of your things. For the embossing pens, they come in a set of 2, so you don't have to choose which ones you want. One is going to be a brush tip, and one is going to be a bullet tip. Oh, I have those backwards. Brush and bullet. There you go. And there's a little picture on there. Brush tip is, well, a paintbrush, and a bullet tip is like a traditional marker tip. You use what works for you. I think when I'm applying glaze to a surface like this, I prefer to go in with the brush, but there again, you have to kind of see what's going on. So here's what we're going to do to tint with glaze. I'm just going to apply this. Now, one of the things you have to remember is wherever you get this ink, that powder is going to stick. So if you don't want ink like on her hands, well, don't color them. Now, because it goes on clear, I'll just kind of hold this up to show you. You see that little reflection? I can actually see that reflection from down here. You might not be able to from just the camera angle, but just so you know kind of what I'm looking for. And I'm just going to go around. If for whatever reason you missed an area and you had to go back, you could go back and touch it up after you heat emboss it, but I'll be honest, I try to avoid that. And the reason is because these are glaze and they're translucent, the more layers you add, the darker it gets. So for example, if you missed a spot and you went in and added another layer of pen, it's just going to make it darker when you add more glaze. All right, so let's take out this one right here, a little Tattered Rose. Grab a piece of wax paper from over here. I could use this one as well. That's fine. And we'll add some glaze. Okay. And the great thing about paper dolls, now if you have your own photos, do this with your own photos, but I would suggest really not working on photo paper because photo paper is going to be emulsion based and photo paper is going to like bubble or blister. So you may want to print it out onto cardstock or something. You just have to remember because people say, well, can I emboss on this? Can I emboss on this? Can I emboss on this? You can emboss on whatever is heat stable, right? Anything is embossable if it can handle 340 degrees. That's the easiest thing. So yes, you can emboss on glass and metal and all of that. And these paper dolls, well, they're paper, okay? There you go, just cardstock. And so we're going to emboss it. Now, because you can see how close that embossing glaze is to my finger, well, I value my fingers, so I'm just going to just use that little clothespin. We're going to heat this up. We're going to do the same thing. Just going to go in and emboss. And I'm just looking, a lot of the times when I'm embossing, I'll just show you, I'm trying not to get to the camera because I want to see it. I just tip it because once you kind of tip it to the side, you'll see that it starts to melt. See that? See how it's even kind of changing color a little bit? I just love the look of this. Doesn't take very long at all. We're going to smooth it out. Perfect. And that's it. Take a look. Let me just get my hand there so you could see. Get the light. There we go. She has a beautiful, love that little bit of glaze. See? Just nice. Now, could you put glaze over a tint? Yes, you can. However, if you tinted it, let's say with crayon, you're not going to be able to then go over it with pen, right? Because the pen is going to remove the crayon. So you would need to use something, if you're going to tint and do that, like Copic markers or something that's not going to be reactive to another ink going over the top, right? But I love the fact of just having the glaze right there just as the tint. And then you could go in and add some other colors with crayons or markers or anything. So that's kind of the gist of embossing glaze. And that is, of course, paper and paper dolls. Really, really simple. But there's a lot of other things we can do, and that's where we're going to head. Okay. How are we doing, Mario? Okay?
So good.
Okay, good deal. And yes, a swatch is really helpful, especially if you want to kind of work with it. So because in embossing glaze, I just wanted to go over the basics before I told you I was going to share some of my favorite techniques. Because knowing what we know about this glaze, knowing that it's translucent, we can use it with other distressed products to create some very, very cool mixed media effects. This is at its core, meaning this is the basics. So if you were going to use glaze for a die cut, right? You could die cut something out of cardstock and you could apply embossing glaze to bring out a more intense color. You know, blue glaze over blue cardstock is going to make that even shinier. And some people say, well, couldn't I just use glossy accents or clear embossing powder? Yes, you can do that. But the fact that this has a tint is actually going to intensify the color and not just gloss the color. So it does give you some great ways that you can expand your color palette with the papers that you have. Okay. The next is going to be texture. And this is where glazes really come in for me, is I love the ability to add texture. And there's a lot of different texture pastes in the Ranger line. I'm not going to go through all of them. These are the ones that are in the Distress line that I happen to love. One is going to be, well, I've got them a lot. Now I have them in little jars. I always put my press and seal over the top so I can press all the way down to the surface of the medium, right? So I press this down to where it kind of forms the skin over the medium. So as the jar gets lower, this keeps going deeper into the jar, and then it eliminates the air and it allows all of my glues and pastes and everything to pretty much last until I get to the bottom. So that's another little tip if you haven't seen that before. So here are just some swatches I made. Here are the different types of paste in the Distress line. One is just called texture paste. It's a matte texture. One is crackle paste. It's a paste that, well, it crackles when it dries. These are grit paste. So grit, well, it's gritty, grittier than texture paste. So see how texture paste is smooth and grit paste is gritty. This is opaque grit paste, and this is translucent grit paste. And we say translucent because obviously the thinner that it is, the more see-through it is. But as with anything translucent versus transparent, if you build up too much of it, it does take on a little bit of opacity. But all four of these are very cool for different reasons. So just want to share how I like to use glaze with pastes and powders. What I'm going to do, I think I'll just take a regular paste for now. Yeah, let's just do texture paste matte. That'll be fine. Don't have to get too involved in this. Okay, just going to take a stencil, and we'll take a palette knife. Now these are distressed palette knives. I just like these little sizes and small, but you can use any palette knife you want. I just happen to like this little sports car size. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply it to a surface, and this surface can be inked or uninked, and then we're going to apply glazes. That's going to be kind of the gist of this. So because this is bubbles, let's just say I wanted to go for something kind of, I don't know, under the sea, right? So I'm going to take just 3 different blues, and I might even take a little cracked pistachio just to throw that in there. So those are going to be my color selection for this. And actually, just for fun, I'm going to throw in a little hickory smoke. It's kind of gray, kind of a moody gray, and I like that. Okay? So moving all this stuff out of the way, I've got my colors here, right? You guys can see that, blues, greens, and a little gray. And we're going to color this because of our paste. So let's just take these powders. I'm going to open them up off to the side here, just so I have some space. And I'll put the lid next to it. And you can do this really with a variety of different colors of glaze. I like the fact that we're really just kind of tinting with powder, so to speak. So I'll start, I've got my splat box off to the side, and I'm going to take a tag. So again, this could be inked or uninked, depending on how you want to start it. But just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to go on one of Dina's white tags, just because we know this is just going to be for a visual demo. So I'm going to place that down. Now you can use sticky grid to hold your tag down. You can do masking tape. You can do all of that stuff for your traditional stenciling. But again, this is just for the demo. So I'm going to show you just quickly how it works. I'm going to peel this back. I'm going to take my palette knife. I'm going to pick up some of that paste on the bottom of the palette knife. All right, that's how we want to do it. And then I'm just going to place this down for now, push that in with my finger, see how I can just make sure I'm touching the medium, and then wrap the excess there. And then what I'm going to do is just take that palette knife and press and drag. So you're going to press that into it and skip over it. We'll probably do one just on mediums and glues and paste, maybe later on. Maybe later on in the month we might just do one just on all the kind of cool, quirky mediums you can do. So what I'm doing is I'm pressing and I'm lightly skimming, and that's why I like a plastic palette knife, because it's got a little bounce to it versus a metal one through it. Okay, so the rule of thumb when it comes to working with any kind of paste is you want to be able to see your design before you do the dismount, right? If you put this on like frosting where it's so thick and you can't see the stencil, and you pick up the stencil, everything falls in, right? So it's really important that you can kind of see it. Don't go in and do this, right? Don't go in and scrape so hard, because you're going to dig out that texture paste and you probably will even catch your stencil. So just kind of a light little skip. I got a baby wipe over here. I also have a little pan with water. That's where I'll throw my stencil, because these pastes easy to clean with water. So I'm just going to take this off. Okay, this I have paste. I throw this right into water, just cold water, warm water. It's behind me. It's just in a little tray, because it is a water-based medium. So as long as it's clean with water, you're good to go. And then we're going to do some coloring with the powder. So again, I'll go back in to wax paper, back into here. And here's what I mean about coloring. I'm going to take the jar. I'm going to tip the jar at an angle, because I have pork chop fingers. You could use a little spoon or whatever little gadgety bit you want. And I'm just going to twist my fingers together to sprinkle on that powder. And you could be close to the surface, you could be far away, whatever you want to do. Okay, same thing, just get some of that powder, whoa, to the surface. And we'll go. And I'm just going to kind of brush off my fingers as I go, because I don't want to put one color into another jar. And you can see on this that it's just kind of going down. It looks a bit linear right now, but don't worry about that. Not right now. I'm just putting down some colors. This one, I know this is little hickory smoke. Okay. All right, so here's what we've got. So right now we have a bunch of powders, see, just kind of sprinkled about. And what I want to do is I want to hold the tag flat, and I'm going to tap dance underneath with my fingers. All right, just going to do a little tap dance, because if I pick this up and tip it, whatever color is here, whoop, there you go, is just going to fall down over everything. And I don't want that. I want it to kind of spread out and bounce around. So just kind of watch what's happening. So I'm not flicking, I'm just doing a little tap dance. So it's almost just like a little vibration, if you will. And I'm just going to tip the tag so that stuff can fall as it does the dance. And there we go. So look at how that color just kind of blends together. So see up there where we had that significant amount of green? See how I still got some hickory smoke and some blue in there, just because I did the dance. And that's where we have this powder. So that's why I like to kind of keep the party in the box. I still have some out here, but I'll use my Swiffer to dust it off. What do you do with this? Well, you could keep it if you want. It's a party mix, but unlike regular embossing powders, these are translucent, so it may be cool and it may not. It may be a good like grunge jar, I guess, if you will, versus having a regular one. All right, move that off to the side. Get my trusty little Swiffer so I can get this. I just don't like powder on the glass mat or glitter. Just, it's like, you know, when you go to the beach and you have sand in your clothes. Oh, all right. Let's put these back on. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's something about like textures, tactile stuff is just kind of just weird. All right. Okay. Just going to put these back on, move these out of the way, and we'll go ahead and talk about this. So when I apply powder to paste, okay, and that's any of the paste I shared with you, my preference is to let this dry. And the reason I want to do that is because I want this to dry because I want a consistent glaze. Because pastes, they're really not designed to be embossed, right? If I was heat drying them, that's one thing. I could heat dry them. But for this, I need to actually emboss it, correct? So if I use an embossing gun at this point, my paste is going to bubble and it's going to blister, and it could be very cool. If you're ever going for something really, really grungy, try that. In fact, I might even emboss this later at the end of this other part just to show you how it will blister. But I prefer to let it dry. So I've already prepped some for the demo. I did these this morning, all right? So this is the first one that I did using texture paste. Now I have not embossed this yet, okay? So you can see just a totally different stencil. One of my favorites for this, I think when I demoed this last time, I shared it because I love that kind of mosaic pattern. It's perfect for glaze. And this is over texture paste. Now remember, texture paste, again from my swatches, is opaque. It is white, so it doesn't really matter. That's why I said you can put it over an inked or uninked background. So we're going to go and emboss this because the paste has already been dry. Drying time, well, it depends on where you live, depends on your weather, but I would say give it 15 minutes and you're good to go, all right? So I'm just gonna warm this up and we're gonna go ahead and emboss this, okay? So let's hold this up so you can see. The beauty of this is going to look like glazed ceramic tiles. So beautiful because the color is just going to have such a shine to it when it melts. And the paste, because we put the powder on while the paste was wet, the paste is what acted as the adhesive, like our embossing ink. So as long as you put it on while it's wet and allowed it to dry, it basically dried into that paste, but it's not shiny, so we want to heat it up. If you weren't embossing it, would it still stick to the paste? Probably so, because we put it on when it was wet. There we go. I'm just tipping it to the light. Always do that, you know, when you're working. Just kind of see where that light is going. Look at how that's working. Oh, isn't that beautiful? I love just seeing these glazed tiles. Now, because I'm getting into this vicinity, I'm going to move my fingers to the other side. And when you're embossing, you can see it should be kind of a relaxing thing. So you want to move the heat tool, but you want to just kind of move it slowly, okay? Just to get that stuff to melt. And you'll see those beautiful tiles. I see one little spot here that I think wants a little more heat. One of the things to know about embossing powder as well, that when it first melts, like its first point of contact, it looks a little, I'm going to say pitted, like orange peel, but then if you heat it a little longer, it'll start to smooth out. Look at that. Look at that beautiful tile tag. Now while the heat gun's on, I'm going to go into this one, the one that is still wet, and show you what happens if you emboss it while it's wet. These are both texture paste. Like I said, some of you may like it, but see how it blisters up? It's pretty cool. Yep. Double toil and trouble. Look at that. And those little bubbles, they'll kind of pretty much stay up there. You might get some to even pop or explode a little bit, but those bubbles will remain because that heat gets trapped under the texture, and when that embossing glaze cools, that's where it stays. So like I said, that may be your jam. You may want that. So just know that that's what's going to happen if your paste is wet and you emboss it. You're going to get all those little air bubbles, or if you let it dry, then you just get the texture of the texture paste. Again, both of these are texture paste with glaze. This one just happens to be on an ink tag. Could we go and ink afterwards? Absolutely, because remember, embossing powder is plastic, so this is going to be sealed. So you can go over it with any kind of colors, but that's going to be for another demo. This is really, I'm trying to stick to it. I told Mario, I'm like, I got to stick to the script, okay? Which I really don't have one, but I have to stick to really where I want to focus. But let's talk about some other textures, right? So we did texture paste, but this is Crackle paste, and this is something that I saw Stacy do. And Stacy Hutchins, she did this, and I was like, whoa, how did you do that? It's a very interesting, detailed, beautiful effect. It just takes a little bit more kind of practice and time when you're doing this. So this is a whole different stencil. This is a rose stencil. Here I went in and colored, but instead of just being random like I did before, I was a bit more focused, meaning I did, you know, tattered rose and kitsch flamingo for the pink, added a little bit of yellow, did some greens. And this is applied over Crackle paste. So when you first apply Crackle paste, it just goes on white and wet. It doesn't look like anything, but it's wet enough for your powder to stick. Then you have to let this dry and crackle. So if you look close, if you look at the leaves, you'll see that the paste has in fact crackled. Okay, but the powder kind of seems to want to fit into or sit into the crack. So now I'm just going to emboss it. So again, I let this dry. This dried and crackled. This Crackle paste takes a little longer. I would say that this is maybe 30 minutes to an hour, depending on where you live. But the effect of this is quite unique. Now, obviously, the thicker the paste, the bigger the cracks. So if you were just to do this kind of on a surface that is, you know, just you put it on with a palette knife, you didn't even care about a stencil, that's pretty cool as well. All right, just going to go and emboss this. You can see that shine, so that's why I keep kind of turning it to the light in front of me, just so I can see it, and move to the other side. Once you do some embossing, you'll get the hang of it. Never bring the gun closer to your hand. That's just a bad idea. Kind of keep it where it is, and whatever you need to rotate to get it to the heat, so be it. Okay. Beautiful. All right. Okay, so this one is melted. So let's take a look at this and see what we have. So take a look at this. So this is embossed, but see the crackle? See how the crackle is actually glazed? It looks like kind of shattered ceramic, but it will get better. We're going to add crayon to this to highlight this, but we'll do that when we actually get to the crayons. So for now, I'm going to put that aside, but we will come back to this tag, okay, when we get into crayons. The next one, this one, probably one of my favorites because I just love the look of this one. So this kind of looks like fused glass or melted glass. And what I've done is for this paste, I've used the translucent grit paste. So the translucent grit paste, unlike the other paste that we've done, unlike the 3 other ones, it's not a white base. It's not opaque. It is translucent. So it makes the embossing glaze a little bit more glass-like, if you will. So I did a different stencil, same idea, just kind of pinching the colors on there, and you kind of get what you get. You don't throw a fit, right? Don't go in there with like little spoons and all that, because I think that the more organic it is, the better, right? Give yourself kind of that creative permission to just do it. So let's emboss this one. This one, as you can see already before it's embossed, it's definitely more textural because grit paste, well, it's designed for that. It's grit. But this one is like, it's so amazing. Like seriously. All right, just gonna go in and emboss. Love the effect already. And I'm just watching, I'm paying attention. Always pay attention when you're embossing. This is a very high temp embossing gun. But see the fact that it focuses the heat and the fact that it can pass through the paper, it embosses really quick. And this is just kind of a no brand heat gun. Like I don't really have a favorite embossing gun. I like this one, this is my favorite, but it doesn't have a brand on it, so. Yeah, maybe someday Ranger will do an embossing gun, I'm not sure. But whatever embossing gun you have, as long as it melts the powder, that's what you need. You need something that you can kind of be around. Okay. So this one already, you can see, it just has a very glass-like appearance. I don't know, I just think it's pretty stunning. Okay. I'll shut that off. Take a look at this. Look at that, guys. Doesn't that just look like fused glass on a surface? Okay. Now, because this is translucent, if you were going to start with a background, you want to start with something light, okay? This case was antique linen. Or if you wanted to just start on a white piece of cardstock and then add your ink later, that's fine. But unlike this one, where we had a brown background, if you would have started with a brown background, these flowers would not have been as vibrant because it would be pulling in that color from underneath. But see the difference of this one? Because of the grit paste, there we go, that gives you a perfect example. See how this is more grittier and a little nuggety and lumpity bumpity because of the grit, whereas this, the texture, it still has a texture, but see that texture is just kind of like pavers, right? It doesn't have too much high and low except for where you like skip off of the stencil. But that's the difference. You really have options of what you want to create with this effect. It's quite cool. I love it. I love the look. So that is embossing glaze when you're working with paste. Again, just something totally different and cool to work with. Now, another thing we can do with glaze is tint things. So I'm going to talk about, this is a demo that I did. I didn't use this folder. I used the other, the riveted patchwork, but anything will work. But if you watch the make we did for Valentine's Day, the Steampunk Valentine, where we took the foil tape, we did the embossing, and then we went in and we embossed it. We colored it with alcohol ink. Let me take this out, right? We put black alcohol ink on it, and then we went and steel wooled and we took off some of that finish, right? So that was something that we did to create a metal look. So I'll just kind of show you here, right? We put that on, alcohol ink, we scuffed it off. You could leave it like that. That's what I did for the heart. But one of the things that's really cool about metal or anything metallic is the fact that we can glaze it, right? So adding glaze, because it's translucent, still gives that wonderful grunge that we had underneath, but it colors it. So if you wanted that heart to be red, or if you wanted to, you know, add some color to your steampunk vibe, that's what makes it so cool. So what I did for this is, I'll talk about when I use metal. This, I used a glue, collage medium actually, to apply this I just think it's so cool, this wonderful glaze to the metal. So if you wanted to kind of change things up, you could. Now, the reason I didn't do this on my Valentine heart, anyone remember? The heart was made of styrofoam, right? Styrofoam is not heat stable. So I could have done it to the sheet first because it does stay pliable, and then I could cut it up and then I could have stuck it on. But if you were to cover the heart with all the metal and then tried to do it and you heat emboss it, the inside, you know, if you were working with paper mache or something, totally fine. Because remember what I said at the very beginning, you can emboss whatever is heat stable. If your structure is not heat stable, it's going to melt. But just wanted to share that, a very cool way that we can add glaze. So let's do that. Let's do the metal technique and talk about this. This is another cool sample to show, right? We had another sample, but our original sample that we did, we sent to a friend, and so Mario created this last night. He did great. A great job, Mario.
Well, thank you.
So this just shows how you can use the embossing glaze on metal, whether that was a metal sheet like I just showed you, or any of your metal charms, metal adornments. Now, if you have silver, that's obviously going to give you the best effect, right? Because that silver is going to act like a light source versus something that is dark or that's brass that already looks yellow, because that yellow is going to impact it. But it could be the entomology, it could be that. Let's see, I think I had some, I don't know where I put them, but the new adornment hearts. And you just brought them in too, Mario. I think I tucked them away in a basket somewhere for safekeeping. Oh, here it is. Oh, there we go. Just dropped the paintbrush. That's nice. So there we go. So any of these metal elements are going to be perfect for doing your glaze on. Now, one thing that people have asked are like, okay, well, what if it's not metal? Could I start with maybe a white base? You can, okay, but it's not going to look metallic, because obviously if you color metal with white paint, you're taking away the metallic and it's just going to look like you did glaze over cardstock. So personally, when I glaze metal, I like it to just be metal. That's just a preference, okay? So the white paint is going to just kind of cause a little, I don't know, little issue for me. So that's just what I prefer to do, is just work on the metal. Here's what we're gonna do. We're actually going to do one. We'll take a butterfly. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way. Okay, I've got to find my paintbrush. Mario, do you mind my brush? I knocked it off the table. Thanks, Mario. Okay, so first thing,
Hey, Alexa.
we're going to emboss metal. Now metal, when you heat it up, is going to be the same temperature as your heat tool. Oh, hold on. I just got to wait because the camera's shaking for a second. Thanks. All right, it'll be just a second. There we go. Okay. So when it comes to metal, metal is going to get hot. So you don't want to hold on to it. So could you leave it on your table? Sure. But what you can do is we're just going to go in. We're going to take a plastic stick. It could be chipboard. If you wanted to do that, you could take a chipboard strip, and you're going to stick that charm on with something. Now you can glue it. You can use, in this case, I'm just using a foam square. You can use a glue dot. You can use collage medium. You can use whatever it is you want. But keep in mind that whatever you use is also going to heat up. So for example, if you're like, oh, I'm going to just glue this on with hot glue. Okay. But hot glue, when it gets hot, is going to become liquid again. So do these. So you just have to be careful because it could fall off the stick while you're embossing. I found really good luck with foam squares because they're just easy to peel on and off. So I have this, and this is going to allow me to hold on to it and heat emboss it to melt. So what I'm going to use to do my heat embossing is collage medium. Collage medium is what is going to allow the glaze as a powder to stick to the metal. Now, why not this? Well, remember I said this is glycerin based. So that glycerin, that oil, is never going to permeate metal. Never. So if you put glycerin on metal, just think of like putting baby oil on metal. The baby oil is never going to dry or soak into metal. It's just going to forever be there. So if you used embossing ink between your metal and your glaze, even if the glaze melts, when you touch it, it's going to rub right off. Right? So that's why if something is slick, a slick surface like resin or metal, something that is non-porous, I prefer to use Collage Medium as my adhesive for my glaze. Make sense? I hope it does. All right, let's go in and do we'll do a little kitsch. Nice pink, okay? And you could go in and do your fancy coloring and you can do all that stuff if you want, okay? But this one will be pretty easy. I'm just gonna go in again with a piece of wax paper. We'll take some Collage Medium. Now Collage Medium, oh, that's texture paste, wrong jar, Holtz. There we go, it's over here. Collage Medium, we just wanna make sure that the Collage Medium is wet enough for the powder, but not too wet to where it will bubble as well. You're gonna take just a little paintbrush, you're gonna dip some in there. And does it have to be Collage Medium? Well, it can just be whatever glue is gonna work on metal, I suppose. So if you have something different, try it, right? Glossy accents, that would probably work, just try it. I just know with Collage Medium, it's definitely going to bond, it's going to be permanent, and it's going to give me enough open time on metal to get my glaze on without getting too blistery. So again, I'm just working it in all those little grooves. That's why I like a little flat paintbrush. Just kind of work that in. You can see, right? See, it's a little wet. And once you're happy with that, we're just going to go in and add our glaze. So put that on, be pretty generous. It can all go back in. All right, tap that off. There's a little bit over there. Dip that in. There we go. So this is what we have right now, right? Just some powder on there. And for now I can set that aside because I've put my powder on. That's it. We're good. It obviously stuck to the glue, which meant that the glue was wet, right? If it didn't stick, that meant your glue was dry and you would just simply need to reapply it. And now I'll put the lid on top of that. My brush is just going to clean with water, Collage Medium, water-based. Put that over there. Take my little wrap. Living in Arizona, man, you have to be really diligent when it comes to cling wrap, or you're just gonna buy a lot of it. Okay, and clean off my fingers. Little glue on there. Okay, so when it comes to the Collage Medium on metal, you have some options. Usually, it's best to let it dry. Okay, drying time on metal is really going to be 5 minutes tops. It doesn't take very long at all. But the upside to this is because the Collage Medium is not thick like texture paste, even if it bubbles while you're embossing, the bubbles don't stay. So really, you can either let this dry or you can emboss it right away. Got it? So whatever you prefer. You obviously know my preferences from this. So I'm just going to, again, hold that. Now for this, I want to hold it flat because if I hold it sideways, that little glue, that foam square is going to start getting hot. When it gets hot, it's not going to want to stay as sticky. And so I'm just going to hold this flat. Metal, it's weird because it doesn't seem like it's doing anything at first because you have to get that entire piece of metal super hot. But man, once it goes, it's almost like the whole thing just changes. Oh, like a butterfly. So we're just going to heat it up. There we go. Oh, there we are. It's starting to melt. Can you see that? You're starting to see that metallic come back through. You see a little sizzle because the Collage Medium is wet. That's okay. It's going to just totally dissipate and we just go around it. I love the look of this. Okay. So there we go. So let's just show you this one. Okay, I put my hand behind there. Okay. So here's the thing to know about this technique. Remember that these are translucent glaze. So if you want a color that's more intense, you can apply a second layer. Right? So if you want something that's going to be a little more intense, all you would do, again, is you have a couple of options. One, you could apply another layer of glue, okay? But if you knew you were going to do this again, I would be heating this, and as soon as it melts, I would have my little jar here, and I would just be sprinkling it onto the hot powder, and that's going to get it to stick, and I can continue to melt layers, like building up like we did with ultra thick. So if this is still hot, you could sprinkle more glaze on there and just keep melting it. But if it's cooled, you can simply apply more collage medium and then just emboss again. But that's the nice thing to know when you're doing metal is depending on the intensity of the color, you can always add another layer of glaze, right? For the most part, the intense colors are one layer. If they're light colors, you can add a second. But really pretty. A simple way that you can completely change any of your metal findings or charms. In fact, you can do this with things that aren't metal as long as they're heat stable. This was a demo I did. I have this video on my blog. This is something we did in Facebook. It's exactly the same thing, except instead of metal, we used resin, right? So these aren't plastic. These are made out of resin. So they're heat stable. And these are the heirloom roses. These are the heirloom florals. And it was the same thing. Brush on collage medium, put on your embossing glaze, melt it, and then these have a layer of crayon, which we're going to get to next to create that kind of vintage look. But nothing different than the butterfly. Just again, just put that on with a little bit of glue and tint it. But I love the impact that it has for taking things that maybe may not be my style or vintage and definitely grunge them up. So we'll get into that a little bit more when we do our crayons and move on to one more thing with glaze, and then we will go into crayon mode. Nice. Okay, one of my favorite techniques that I was just playing around one day and discovered was working with glaze and crayons. That's going to kind of be the transition from glaze into crayons. And I was using a lot of my Sizzix stuff. I think, when you have die cuts, whether you have impresslets or backgrounds, there's a lot of cool things that you can do with embossing glaze and your die cuts. Okay, so we've already gone in and prepped several things, and there's different things that we can work with. One can just be white cardstock. Okay, so white cardstock, this is just the mixed media heavy stock white because I love really how thick that is. This is the new Lucky Love, or we've got the Clover. We have that wonderful puffy heart. You can use, I love this frame, beautiful ornate frame. So the impresslets, these guys, they die cut and emboss at the same time. So you actually get paper embellishments. We had the winged that we did last year. So beautiful with the detail. But they can also be done out of metallics. Now, metallics, the thing to keep in mind, metallic cardstock is going to do exactly what this did, right? So if you don't want to do, the metal foil and all that, your metallic cardstocks, and this is just metallic craft stock, is going to do the same thing. Right, so I can have that silver paper. I can go over this because it's paper. I can either use embossing ink because it'll soak in, or I can use collage medium, either one. And I can put my glaze on there and it is going to become translucent metallic. And you can do this over backgrounds like kaleidoscope or even like this beautiful flourish. And there's a lot of unique things that we can do with this. In fact, I'll keep this out. We'll just kind of work with a few pieces. And we'll keep these out. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, so we'll kind of figure it out. But I'll show you the gist of the technique because I still have that kind of tag that I was playing around with. This was the technique that I did just playing around, which was, hey, I wonder if I just kind of swipe my embossing dabber, just kind of light, miss a few spots, even do some flicking to get some stuff off. Put the glaze on there, right? Do a little bit more flicking and tapping and remove some of the glaze. Emboss it and then add a color. How would that look? And that's really what kind of created this effect. And that's what I'm going to share with you of how we work with this. So first we'll just do the quick metallic that I talked about. I'll take the dabber just because I want to do something really quick for this one. And I'm just going to swipe some of this on there just so you can see what it looks like. And I'm doing this because, again, this is paper, right? This is paper, so I'm using the dabber. This one was actual metal, so I chose collage medium. Your call of really which surface that you're working on. Then for this one, I will take, I think I'm going to use a little cracked pistachio. That'll be pretty. Ooh, no, I think I want to do, see, I can't decide, guys. I'm going to use a little crackling campfire because I want to throw some of that warm glow on there. Just so you can see the color of that. Okay. This is just more for a swatch test. Again, just for the sake of the demo. All right. Perfect. And I will emboss that in a bit. I don't need to do it right away. I'll just do it in a little bit. Let's go through the technique on these pieces. And we'll probably do little paper pieces. Let's say you were doing something specialized, right? Let's say we were going to do this little frame. In fact, let's not say let's do. I think I'll have time to pull this off, Mario. We'll see. Okay, I'm going to take my embossing pen, my brush pen. And the idea is I'm just going to color some elements and then I'll do the rest of the frame. Okay, just so you guys know where I'm at right now, where I'm thinking. So I'm going to do a little pink, a little kitsch flamingo. I'll also do a little tattered rose. I'm going to do a little bit of green. So we'll do some, wow, this is turning into quite the demo, Mario, which is what he warned me about. He did. He's like, you're going to get so caught up in embossing powder that you're going to probably emboss for 4 hours. No, I won't. I promise I'll do this quick. Okay, I'm just going to go with my pen. And what I'm doing is I'm going to spot color just some of the details of that frame. Okay, so just say, and I'm doing this quick, so please don't judge the coloring. All right, don't judge me on this one. So we'll take that. Don't judge me on this one. You never know. Okay, we're going to add a little pink there, and I think I'm going to do those blue. So let's just take that and add a little pink. Okay, knock that off. I'm going to go in with these guys quickly, just with my pen. And again, I know you would be doing an amazing job yourself, right? So I'm just starting with those little flowers, but at home you'd have your favorite song going and yeah, your favorite beverage and singing along and kind of doing your thing. All right, so right now I'm just spot coloring with the pen. See what's happening? So wherever the pen is, that's where some powder is going. And you could put each color back. In fact, that would probably be a great idea. But for this case, I'm not doing it. Then I'm going to go in with the leaves. Now, the only thing you have to remember when you're doing this is try not to touch what you've already done with the pen, or it's going to lift off. If you wanted to emboss in between, like put the pink on, heat it, put the blue on, heat it, then yes, you could totally do that. That would even be a safer bet. But for the sake of this demo, you'll get the idea. So I don't really want to waste time embossing on each layer because I just want to get on to crayons. Okay. Again, just going in with some green. All right. So far, so good. See, and for this, because of this technique, I'm not bothered by covering everything. In fact, if I don't, it's just going to make this look even better. All right. So I've got my spot coloring done. So that's what I'm going to emboss first, and then we'll do the rest of the frame. So for the spot coloring, I just used the Distress Embossing pen because I wanted to get some ink down, and I'm done with these colors of glaze. Okay. So let me just take this. You can put it in the party mix jar or just kind of throw that away. And we're going to emboss. Grab my little clip. There we go. Okay, so we're embossing our first layer, and you'll see why I'm embossing this first. And this was really kind of skippy, so I'm not worrying about doing it. There's really not much on here, but it's going to be perfect for the technique. That's what I want. And I'm not just saying that. It's really what you ultimately want. So I'm embossing those areas just until they become shiny. You can see they got a little shine. There we go. Let's take care of this one down here. Okay. Excellent. Done. Okay. So once we have that done, there's our spot coloring. Can you see that? It's just little glazed flowers. Now we're going to do the rest of the frame. And the rest of the frame, it can be whatever you want it to be. I'm going to choose speckled egg because I think speckled egg is a beautiful color for this. So here's what I'm going to do. You can take either the pen if you want. You can take a re-inker and a paintbrush. You can take your finger, or you can take the embossing dabber. So I think I'll choose the dabber just because that's what I want to use. If I could, I'll choose the dabber only if I can work this quick enough. So here's what I'm going to do. When you're doing the dabber, you want to make sure that you don't go over the parts you just colored if you can avoid it. All right. But if you do, that's okay. So I'm just going to take that and I'm just going to just dab some on, kind of go around, go in there, follow that frame. Okay. You can see I'm just applying pressure. I'm not squeezy bottle. Okay. Just going around that frame. I love the detail of impresslets, man. They're cool. Sadly, it's probably the shortest lived SKU in the Sizzix world. You know, they seem to retire them quicker than I can design them, but c'est la vie. Okay, there we are. So next we're going to take our glaze and we're going to put this down And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to try to avoid where I put that just in case I was a little too sloppy. But you'll see where we're going. So that's why you might be looking like, this is like a hot mess. Why is he doing this? You'll see, because I'm going to actually take off even more. Okay. So that's what we have with speckled egg. And you can see already that there's some areas that are missing, right? Some of the glaze. That's okay. We're going to actually take more of that off. So next, let me put this back in the jar. Cool. All right. So here is what I'll bring in my splat box for. Normally, I would be doing this over a trash can or something. But here's what we want to do for this technique. For this technique, because I'm going to show you that kind of vintage enameled look, we're going to flip this over and we are going to flick this because we've seen what the flicking does, right? The flicking is going to remove some of that powder, and that is what I want to do. So I'm not going to overly do it because I still want some of the powder on there. Then I'm going to go with my fingers in just certain areas and actually touch that powder, which will also remove it. But it's going to, you'll see, it's going to enhance the overall technique when we're done, right? So you can see the little white areas here and there where my finger just grabbed off some of that glaze. Yes? Okay. Now we'll emboss this. I'll go in, clip that up, and heat emboss. So the idea behind this is we actually wanted to create an area that is going to be sealed with the glaze, and this is just over white cardstock, and then we're going to grunge it up. And that's what's going to give us just a really amazing, amazing technique. It's going to look like just vintage enamel. Okay. I love speckled egg. It's just such a pretty color. Such a pretty color glaze. I really like a lot. Well, I mean, I like all the glazes for different things, but when it comes to something vintage, I certainly prefer a much lighter color. And really, tip it in the light. Make sure that you see shine. If you don't see shine, just because you went over at the heat tool doesn't mean you gave it time to emboss. Now, if you're new to embossing, I'll tell you this as well. If you over emboss, meaning you want to make sure it's really, 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 really cooked. Okay, embossing powder is plastic, and when you heat it, it becomes fluid. And if you overheat it, it will become so fluid that it will actually soak into the paper. So if you've ever embossed a card and let's say you get that nice raised edge and you kind of go one more pass and all of a sudden it's gone, you're like, did it burn away? No, it actually became so molten and liquid, it soaked into the paper. So just keep that in mind, that you want to get the hang of it, that when you see that it's shiny, trust that it's done. Don't think you have to go back, with 3 or 4 more layers just to make extra sure. Okay? So here's what we've got. We have an embossed design, but what we want to do is we're going to turn the embossed design into this look, this really cool vintage grungy, and these are all paper. These are all paper pieces from different impressets that I've had, trims that we used to have. I love this. This is such a great corner piece, or just you can cut this in half, right? And use it at the top and the bottom of something. We did leaves. I love these medallions that we had in a couple of sizes, but it's amazing that these are just paper and you could just do so much with the paper. So once we've embossed, now we're going to get into the crayons. And really, we could have done this with all of them. In fact, I just have to do the clover. Sorry, Mario. Just have to. I have to because, well, listen, St. Patrick's Day, just a clover, just because I love the idea of that. And I'm just going to do a dabber. So for that one's just going to be green. I think I'll do peeled paint. That'll be a nice green. Yeah, but I tried to tell him, like, hey, I'm gonna stick with it. He's like,
and I tried to tell you.
Yeah, he's like,
that's a lot of stuff.
He's like, no, you're not. That's all right. I'll be okay. Okay, peeled paint. Nice. Just gonna pick this up. Just make sure I've got my powder on there. While that's here, I'm just gonna do the flicking right here over that. Okay, so see what I have? So see how like it's kind of around the edges it's gone. Then I'm just going to take my fingers and just touch in a couple areas. You don't want to take it all off, but the idea is you want to see some of your surface, your foundation, before you emboss it. That's perfect. Okay. Yes, we've got a frame and a clover. I love peeled paint. Man, peeled paint is the green of my dreams. Yep. It's just a good color. Okay. This one's going to be a little challenging because I don't really have anything to hold on to. So let me get these guys. Where is... Okay. I'm going to take out my squeezers. There's a little, they're from Sizzix. They're kind of little inverted tweezer. Now, yes, they're metal, and yes, they're going to conduct heat, but these have those little rubber pads. So if you hold on to that, I'll let you know if that's a good idea or not in just a minute. But this just has, I mean, they're so fine and tight, so it should be good. In fact, I kind of think I like this better than the clothespin. Oh, heck yeah. They're super secure. All right, so I'm just embossing that peeled paint. Wow. And these tweezers, they don't feel hot at all. Oh, that little rubber grip is nice, because I bet the tweezers themselves are hot. Oh no, they're kind of cool down here. They're probably toasty up there. There we go. An embossed little clover right there. Take it out from the squeezer. Good. Thanks, Sizzix. That's a nice little tool for that. Okay, so now we'll get on to, what's that?
Squeezers.
Well, they're tweezers, but you have to squeeze them. So,
every time I hear it, and then everyone starts calling them squeezers.
but if you call them squeezers, then at least you know how to use them. Because listen, the first time, what do they call them? Like inverted tweezer or reverse tweezer? But that's what they called them, and I'm like, I don't even know what that, like how to use that. But when you squeeze them, every time you use them, then you totally understand. That's why I love them now. I never used to like them because I could never get them to work. But squeezers, that you just get to grab onto that. All right, so here's what we've got. We have 2 glazed pieces of just white mixed media heavy stock that we have areas exposed. That's the important part of this technique, right? We want areas exposed of raw paper, raw cardstock. Now we'll get into the antiquing, and we'll move into crayons from there. So we're going to use distress crayons. Distress crayons are a water reactive pigment, and I'll get into that demo next. But the idea behind this water reactive pigment is that it is opaque, it is thick, like, I'm going to say more like a lipstick than anything else. So you can see it kind of comes off on my finger. It's not like a hard pastel. It's not too creamy like an oil pastel. It's just kind of its own thing. It is different than a gelato in the sense that it is only water reactive if you move it. It doesn't water react on contact. So that's really an important fact, and you'll see in the demo why we're going to do it. Next, I'm going to use a distress blending brush. You can see one that I have totally dedicated to a brown crayon because I do this technique on a lot of things, whether it's grit paste or anything else. And so I just have one dedicated to a brown crayon. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by just taking this and scribbling that brown right over everything. Don't freak your freak. Just trust that, okay? Scribble some of that on. Then we're going to take this and we want to work this crayon into it. So because I want to work this into a smaller space, see how my bristles move? If I slide the tip of this up and just hold that ridge with my finger, that's going to make those bristles more compact. So almost like a stencil brush, and that allows me to work in that medium easier, right? So keep that in mind with the blending brush, why I like this. It's not like the soft makeup brushes that people are using for ink blending, right? It's a different kind of brush, the distress brush. I use it for ink blending, but it's not soft like that. So I'm working that brown into the areas. And the idea is I want to get, some of that dark color into all those little grooves. So don't be afraid to go in and put more on. You actually want to put more on than you like. That's how you know it's good. So if you're applying color and you hate it, you're doing the right thing. Okay, for this one. So we're just going to apply crayon and work this in. We really want to work that in just with the brush. There we go. This is nice and grungy now. Okay, this is what we have. And while we're at it, I'm just going to go ahead and do this one so we can do the technique at the same time. Again, just scribble that on. This happens to be walnut stain. Walnut stain is my jam. Distress crayons are sold in kits. I'm not sure if Ranger still sells them individually on their website, but I can tell you that individual crayons themselves are going away. So they'll only be in kits from here on out. And actually, I'm not sure how many kits are going to remain, but at least that the line is not totally gone. I know several of the kits made it. I would hope that the entire palette stays forever, but you know, that's really up to Ranger. Okay, so far we've got that. I'm going to slide this up to cover those bristles, put the top on, locks in, there we go. Right, there's our crayon. So here's what we have at this point. Two pretty glazed pieces with all the color now covered in a layer of crayon, right? Kind of smushy. Next, I'm just going to take a baby wipe, a wet paper towel, whatever, and I'm just going to put some on my fingers to start. And I'm just going to start working that crayon just with my fingers off of the surface. Shut the front door, right? Because the crayons are water reactive, and this is wet water, just that little bit of moisture on my thumb is removing the color. Okay? Now you would say, well, if they're water reactive, does that mean every time I touch it, it's going to come off? No, only if you lick it, and don't lick your work. So if you're just touching it with your fingers, the crayon's actually dry, and they won't rub off unless it's wet. So you would have to actually, you know, go in with a wet finger, lick the work to get that crayon to move. So just touching it isn't doing it. And you can see that I'm just going around, and look how I'm just revealing that beautiful color of glaze, but I'm leaving all that crayon in the areas. And any area that was left white, you see that little white edge? That's where it really soaks in because there's no glaze there to protect the paper, right? So wherever we had no glaze at all, that's where it's really dark brown. That's how you get all those kind of dark areas. And that's why we do the flicking and the additional kind of rubbing off. Because see, this crayon's not moving unless I go in with a damp finger. I mean, seriously? Come on. Can you even, this to this, a sheet of paper? I can't even. But that's the whole thing. This is what I was saying. Again, if you watch these demos, you know I talk about compartmentalizing your creative process. Sit down one day for an hour, 2 hours, and just glaze things. Just make a bunch of these beautiful things so you have a bag of them, and then when you need to make a card or a make, you've got a great embellishment to use that you've created where you don't have to get out your paper, die cut your impresslet, get out your glaze, get out your crayon, do all that stuff. You've got things done. So on those days that you can't think of making anything, you can certainly sit down and be creative. Creative, just all you need to do is let those thoughts go, and that's the beauty of it. All right, so on this, if I just go with my finger, I'm not taking off that crayon, right? Because the crayon feels like a little waxy until it dries, then it's smooth. But as soon as my finger goes on to that baby wipe or paper towel, look at that. Come on. See? It's just, that's why I had to do the shamrock, because it's just amazing to see. Now, if you didn't want it to be grungy, maybe you haven't crossed over to the dark side and brown is not your thing, you could go over this with antique linen, picket fence. You could do even a lighter color. But that is so cool. And let's say you took off too much. Let's say you were just the first time you were so excited you took off all the color. You could apply crayon all over again and it's a total do-over. But look at that. So great to see that. I think it's just, that's what I love about crayons. They are because it's a pigment, it's going to cover anything that goes on. And because it's water reactive, it's only going to work when it's wet. So now let's get into the crayon demo. These bring me happiness, pure happiness on the inside, because you can take this and just create these effects on so many different things. Like these leaves that we did last year. This was just sprinkling different color glazes and doing the same thing. Just unbelievable. Love it, love it. And now I have a bunch of things die cut that I'll be playing with later today because I really want to color some more elements. Okay. Nice. Good times.
That was awesome.
I just think really when you see it happen from start to finish, that's why, for that, I didn't want anything pre-embossed because you have to see it. You have to see how easy it is to spot color with embossing powder. Some people you get way too in your head where you think, oh, I need to, have little straws and little spoons and, be so particular with little tiny brushes. No, you really don't. What you need to do is just go in and let that do the work. Speaking of, we're going to go back to this one. Remember this one that was crackled? Okay, so you have some options for this. Could you go in and apply ink over it? Yes, you can apply your ink pad or a spray and get some ink in there. But another great way to do it is with the crayon. So I'm just going to scribble some of this on here. And I won't do the whole tag. I'll just show you some ways that we can do this. Now, because I don't want it to go on super thick like I did for these guys, okay, I'm just going to add a little bit of water, okay, just to my mat, and I'll go in with a little bit of water, and you see how that just turns that into like fluid, almost like a creamy, dreamy paint, okay? And that's just going to allow me to go in, and it's going to darken my tag, right? So that's why I started light. So if you don't want this to be brown, well, then don't use brown. There you go. But by using the brush, I can also almost create just a drop shadow. And so what I'm doing with my fingers is I'm just kind of smudging over the top. You'll see in a second. I'll hold it closer, right? So could I spray everywhere? Yes. But the nice thing about a crayon is, man, it adds just that serious intensity because it is a pigment. It's not a dye. It means business. And I could still go in and stamp and do ink blending and do all of my little jibbery jab to the background. I didn't even know what word I was trying to think of in my head, and that came out. But just whatever I was going to do in the background, stamping, stenciling, you could do any of that, and then you could still add this. But take a look at what that's done, right? There you go. Now you see that crackle. Isn't that amazing? So that crayon is what went into the crack. So see how they're here, but you can't see them, right? They're here, you just can't see them. But by putting something in there, especially a medium like crayon, that's what really brings out the intensity. And I love using the crayon with a little bit of water because you see how the outside is just, I don't know, it's just a bit more dreamy. It's not like ink where it's fluid. It could totally be ink though. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But I love the idea of using crayons with a little water on there to create that effect. So that again is Crackle paste with glaze and then little brown crayon with some water and a blending brush. Right? Nice. It's just so pretty to see that effect. So now we'll move on into the world of crayons, and you're going to learn all about them. So let me get these guys over here in their tin. I'll worry about color order later. You know, got to have them in Roy G. Biv. Must. But for now, they'll come out. Okay. And they could just sit right on the table there, Mario. Thank you. Mario's right here. Thanks, Mario. Perfect. All right, I'm going to emboss this one real quick because he's not watching. So here we go. I agree. It looks totally like porcelain. We're going to just do this metal one real quick because this was that metallic cardstock. I just saw it when I was cleaning up. So I need to emboss it. And I want you to see that metallic paper and embossing ink is quite stunning. Especially this color, this crackling campfire. It's just this, I don't know. Sometimes it appears red to me and sometimes it's more on the orange side. And this paper, I would have this already stuck down to something thicker because craft stock is really kind of flimsy. There we go. And could you do crayon on this one? Yes, you could. Once you learn that crayon trick, then nothing is safe. But take a look at that, right? See how pretty that is? It's just like a tinted metallic in crackling campfire. It's just, wow, it's good. Okay. All right, now I promise I'm moving on. So let me get this stuff out of the way and this, and I'll bring in the crayon stuff. Okay. So many things. And this is, there you go. Now you can understand that was the walnut stain in those up to the glaze, just like we did the paper. See, once you learn how something works, right? Once you learn about, okay, I need this for this, then you just start applying it to things that you really wouldn't normally think about, right? You look like, okay, well now I know how to glaze that. So I know glaze sticks to that, and I know the crayon did that and that. So what happens if I combine this and this on something else? Well, then you get that. So those are the ideas that I hope these demos spark in your brain. That whole what if you're saying to yourself, what if, you should be trying it out. You really need to be doing it. Okay. So let's get into crayons. We'll talk about that. I'm just moving some space over here. If you hear the shuffling about, that's what we're doing. We're moving stuff from one area to the next because it is important to understand crayons, what they do, and how they work. All right, there we go. So distressed crayons, what are they? The fact that it's a water-based pigment is quite interesting because many people, when they think of that, they immediately think of like a pigment ink pad, right? Or again, they're thinking of something like an oil pastel, or maybe they're even thinking of a gelato. And there's similarities to all of these, but distress crayons are kind of their own thing, right? Their own little formulation. Again, they're in the crayon tin. I like it because as a kid, even though I had that little stadium seating for my crayon box, I was the kid that still dumped them out into, my little school box, and just I like to dig around in colors. But for the sake of the video, I cleaned this up just so you can see a nice Roy G. Biv, but I dig them up. And I kind of keep like red, orange, yellow, green into here, and then I go blue, purples, and browns. But really, you do you. You do your thing. Here's the basic. I'm going to start with just a sheet of watercolor cardstock. And if you just take a crayon, okay, the crayon just turns from the bottom to extend the medium. Now, the longer you have crayons, the longer you don't use your crayons, the more your crayons will dry up, okay? It doesn't have any glycerin in there, so I'm not saying you have to use them in a week, and I'm not saying it has a shelf life, but you'll see that when you first open a crayon, it's very creamy, and then when you go back to crayons that maybe you haven't used for years, they're a little firmer. Well, that just means you need to use that medium. Nothing in the craft world, contrary to many makers' belief, it's not the everlasting gobstopper. Nothing is designed to last forever and ever just because you bought it 5 years ago and you've never opened it. They're things that have a shelf life. They don't necessarily have an expiration date because that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go bad, but art mediums are designed to be used. So keep that in mind. On watercolor paper, the nice thing about using a crayon is that we can go in and add some of that color to the surface. Go in with a water brush. I'll grab that right here. Or a paintbrush with water, either one, just something wet. And we can move this color around, right? So I have the ability to actually go in with this brush and dissolve that medium on the surface, okay? And I can continue with that medium. So that scribbly line can keep going and going and going because it is a pigment, right? Again, I'll just do that a little closer. So I scribbled that on. That's how it looks, right? If I go to touch it, it doesn't really want to move, right? If I applied enough medium, I'll do some down here, all right? See, I had more there. And I quickly go in and I try to move that. I can smudge it, but we'll get into that a little later. Smudging is much easier on a coated surface than a raw surface. So that's where the water reactive property comes in. So going in with my brush, you can see if you just lightly go over it, you have a line. But if you continue to go in with your brush, you're dissolving that colorant. It needs to be dissolved. It is a water-soluble pigment. So once you dissolve that, then you can go in, let me just get that little boogie off there. Then you can go in and just kind of do your thing. Let's say you don't want to color directly. You can color on a craft mat or on your glass mat, right? You can, if you have a glass media mat, you can color on your palette box, right? Color that with the crayon and use that for watercolor. You can pick up color from there and we can add color that way. And this gives you way more control because you're not trying to blend out a line, right? It just allows you to just pick that color up and blend that. If you have one of the distress ink palettes, right, that empty palette, you can scribble your crayon in each circle, make a palette that you never have to clean off, right? Mario, would you mind grabbing me one of those palettes over there, please? Sure. I'll just show them that, but I'll just keep going just so you get the idea. So here's the interesting thing about the crayon that people really need to understand of why they're different, because everyone just says, okay, here's the palette I was talking about. This one happens to have alcohol ink in it, but it's sold empty, right? It's got this little hinged lid. Oh, this actually has distress reinkers. I can see the shine. So these are distress reinkers. But you can take a blank palette, scribble your crayon in the circles, and then it will stay there indefinitely. And anytime you go in with a wet brush, it will be a watercolor palette. So then you don't have to scribble it out and waste your crayon once you make a palette. So I have palettes for distress ink, distress oxide, alcohol inks. Oh, here's a blank one. Thanks, Mario. Sure. He's always just right there. So yeah, you could just take your crayon and you're just going to scribble it in there, right? That's it. That's all you need. It's got a little ridge in there that's going to grab onto the medium. It's really a little well because that's how much reinker you should put in there, right? That little drop is for reinker. Most people think they need to fill the well. Denied. You really just need to put a drop in the center and that's all you need. So that's all we need for the crayon. And then anytime we wanted to pick up color, you're just going to go in and see it's just going to wet just like a watercolor palette. So you can make your own palette with that, and it's just a nice thing that we have. Okay, I just saw like economy size of a walnut stain. I don't know. I buy these in the bulk for those. Okay. So what I was saying about this, there's so many questions of like, how are these different than a gelato? How are these different than a water-soluble crayon? How they have their own properties. So there's so many different brands of water-soluble crayons and things like that that you really have to test it to see if it's the right medium for you. But here is why I wanted distressed crayons for this line, because of this particular property. If I scribble it onto a substrate, whether that is paper, whether that is an inked background, whether that is a journal page, whatever that is, and I went over it with something. Maybe I went over it with a spray ink. Maybe I just went over it with mica, or if I just took water. A water-soluble crayon or a gelato is normally just going to go in and wick. Okay, there's still a little boogie right there. Is going to wick, right? So my water-soluble crayon would start moving. Distressed crayons do not move when they're wet. You, as the maker, have to physically move it. You have to move this medium, right? That's what I love about these crayons, is that if I'm working, let's say on a journal page or a card or whatever it is you like to work on, and I had something inked and I stamped an image and I wanted to color, and then I wanted to go in with a stencil and spray ink through the stencil, I don't have to worry about what I colored to run or smear, because it won't unless you touch it, unless you physically move it. And that's really why I like the distressed crayons, because I can still manipulate this as much as I want. But if I had just something down, I'll take another piece of paper, right? Let's take a little bit brighter color. Okay, maybe we'll go in with some picked raspberry or whatever. And let's just say you colored something beautiful. Isn't that beautiful? It is. All right. Definitely not a coloring class. I'm not that teacher, but I'll sure show you how to use the mediums. Okay, let's say you colored something beautifully. Let's say you even did a little watercoloring, you know, because you watch this and now you're going to go in and do your pretty coloring, okay? And you did all that coloring and you let this dry. So now I'm going to dry this. Only because I added water to that, I want that part to dry. So because I'm not embossing, it's the only time I use an embossing gun for embossing. Okay, I let that watercolor dry. This is my page. Now I want to go and I want to add some color. So we're going to add some brown. That'll be great. Let me find my splat box. I don't make a mess here. I love these demos. This is just like really when I'm at a show or whatever, Mario. Just remember that, right? Nice. You just grab whatever's there. Okay, so you see what's happening right away. And I can go in and add a little water to that. Get that to kind of move. So you'll see that when you add your color, and even when this dries, this ink is going to float off of that color. So when you add your color, your crayons are going to resist. They're going to resist anything fluid. Now, if you went in and did blending, okay, you're creating friction. You're moving it. So if you went in to do ink blending, you would want to make sure that your ink was dry enough. So you could certainly use ink blending foam over that and it won't move the crayon. But if there is water involved, if you like thinned out your ink or you tried to use a re-inker, then that would not really work. All right, so that's the effect that you give. And if you wanted to add more water to that because you wanted to get that to move, see how I can get that stain to continue to drip off of that? See how some of it dried on there? I let it, but then I went in and sprayed more water. My crayon is still there unless I move it. And if I move it, it will blend. That's what I love about distressed crayons, that you as the maker get to decide whether you want your medium to move, whether you want to watercolor with it, whether you want to just color directly with it, and it gives you the ability to put something over the top of it, okay? That's one of the great things. So with that, what else can we do with them? Once you understand the properties, which is why I wanted to start with just kind of that basic sheet, because you have to know the mediums, because it's such an interesting world, this creative world. I've been doing this for so long. And I always find it fascinating that when something new comes on the market, there's part of the industry that's just excited for new. I think that's the heart of a true maker, right? I'm excited for something new, whether it's in the yarn world or like the new Cricut mug thing. I'm not going to make a coffee mug, but it's just cool, new technology in the creative world. And then there's those that as soon as something new comes out, they just want to judge it. They want to say, there's no reason for that. That's garbage. This is the... And I never understand that, because I feel that there's room for everyone in the creative world, because everyone that's going to design something is going to design hopefully with their customer or their product line in mind. And that's what I truly believe on. Okay. So next we're going to go with that. We're going to do, all right, I'm going to take this. All right, let's go with that. No, I don't think that's going to work. So what do we got? 1 second. Technical difficulties. What do we have here? That's giving us an issue. Okay, well, let's see. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. Let's take that. Yeah, take that one.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, cool. All right. Power issues. Okay, here we go. So next up, what we're going to do is talk about paper dolls, right? Anything that's coated. And Paula Cheney is really, she orchestrates these in the most magnificent, beautiful way. So Paula, I know you're watching, so throw out your blog, because she just does incredible things. There's many people that color paper dolls, but I think we'd all agree that when really Paula does her magic, it's amazing. And the idea here is taking, and I'll use both of these, is taking the crayons and working again from the matte, the glass matte, or the palette. Okay, and you can take, for example, we'll take a light color. We'll do like a little worn lipstick. We'll scribble there. We'll do a little peeled paint, and maybe maybe Paula is cringing at my color choice, possibly, but I'll just scribble some on. Now, the idea behind this is that you're going to use a water brush, but you want it to have minimal amounts of water. Okay, because paper dolls are a coated surface, and if you use too much water, it's just going to kind of float off, if you will. So let's just say we want her dress to just be a light pink. I just pick some of that color up with my brush, and now I'm moving it around. Now, if you don't want brush strokes, you can go in and you can tap that with your finger. Some people, I've done paper dolls, let's say with like a distress marker. You can certainly go in with a distress marker. You could go in with Copics. There's a lot of things that you can do. But by having this dry enough, it's going to allow you to put down color, and you can build onto that as well. And once your brush gets too wet and you see you start picking that color off, then you're going to need to go back, dry off your brush, and start again. So the idea is just to kind of go over the color, and then you can add the color, right? And that's really a light palette. If you have a brighter, bolder color, keep that in mind when you're working on paper dolls that might have a darker clothing, darker coat. And if you struggle with the water brush like I do, a lot of times I'll go in with a Q-tip, cotton swab, pick that up, and then work that color in. Or you can just go in and take the crayon, apply it directly to the paper doll, and using that crayon, you can smudge that in. Because this is coated, it's going to give you smudge time. It's going to allow you to take that color and move that around, right? But it's not nearly as seamless and fluid and beautiful as when you tint it with water. And like I said, Paula is, I mean, she's going to look at this and roll her eyes like, dude, you need to figure that out. But just adding that light color with crayon, perfect. Or you can do crayon tinting, or you can smudge. And I would still smudge this out more because, I mean, his pants look like they're electric, but you get the idea. Now, you can see that this crayon, see how it doesn't want to move because it's already started to dry? I could get it to move if I wet it. That's the other nice thing about paper dolls, is that because it's coated, if you went in with just water, you could take that off and you could start over with your crayons, right? That's the nice thing. If you did this with markers, or which I needed to do, if you did this with, regular markers or Copic or something that permeated, you wouldn't have that flexibility. But I wanted to share some of the things because I do have a little bit of kind of an issue with some of these coated surfaces that I will address in just a minute. Okay, so let's talk about surfaces, wet or dry. If you work with the crayons on a dry surface, and this is one of the Dina tags and one of the mixed media tags. Half of this tag, I don't know if you can see it, you can see that little shine down the middle. Half of this tag has a light layer of collage medium. The other half is just the paper. So if you go in with a crayon and you're working on dry paper and you're trying to smudge, you don't have much smudge time. it'll go a little bit, but then it's done. When it's done, it's done. If you have something sealed, you can see that collage medium. I like collage medium because it really does appear more matte than shiny. That's why I like it. You can hardly tell that it's there. So if you put it over paper, you coated your whole piece of paper, then when you go in, I can take my finger because I know it's going to be reactive with some water, and it's going to give me the ability to literally smudge all of this out. Okay? And even if you didn't have water, you're still going to be able to smudge. It's just going to be more intense, right? So you say, well, hold on, Tim, you use water, so I'm sure you could do the same thing with water on the other side. No. Okay? When you do that, that color is just going to go right into the paper. It's just going to soak in. It's not going to coat the top of it. So again, if you had dry paper, collage medium, a little bit of water, it's going to blend, okay? But this is where it's going to just, where it soaks into the paper, it's done, right? I can't get that to move anymore. But because I have a layer of collage medium, that's going to allow me to move that out, and it's just going to stay. And I can continue to move wherever that is as much as I want. So having a layer of collage medium is, to me, kind of the game changer when it comes to working with the crayons. Now, here's some tips when it comes to using collage medium. Some people have issues saying it just, I see the lines and it looks scratchy and I don't really like that. No problem, but there's ways around that, right? It's just about how you apply this. If you apply it in a linear fashion, I think I did it on this one. Well, I'll tell you in just a second if I did. Gosh, I have to see which side I did. Okay, there's the side I did. All right, let's go in with, and I'm choosing bold colors just for the demo, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm trying to wet this out so you can get it. All right, then we're going to go down here. And we're going to move this out. Okay. So let's take a look here at the difference. Okay. You see how this one looks scratchy, liney, and this one doesn't? Whoop. There we go. See the difference? This is applying collage medium with a brush, putting lines in there. This is applying collage medium with your fingers. So if you brush it on, the collage medium, of course, is going to have brush strokes. Therefore, your crayon, no matter how much you blend, is going to have brush strokes because it's going to pick up that subtle detail. If you want a surface that's totally smooth to color your crayons, put it on with your fingers and like massage it into the paper, right? Don't leave any streaks in there, and that's going to smooth out your coloring, right? So that's really just about how you apply the collage medium is going to determine how you have your color blending out, right? Pretty simple. And you can see here on this side, this is where I don't have any collage medium, and it starts to soak into the paper. So there's your half and half. And things like this, I mean, this might bore a lot of people. To me, this is the best thing for me to do when I'm in my creative space, is that what if, what can I do? Okay, I don't like that. How do I avoid getting rid of those lines? Okay, let's try this. And there's different ways. I mean, Paula has always been putting collage medium on with her fingers and kind of smearing it around. So trying different techniques and effects, and that's why I think sharing on social media, showing people like little tips and tricks is so vital to continue the education of how a medium is supposed to work. So let's go into something that is a little different. What if we have a texture on there? Well, I do love the fact that I can still use texture paste and I can use it with crayons. Anytime I put something down, I still go over it with a layer of collage medium. So in other words, this was texture paste that I put through there. I let it dry, and then I went over the whole tag with collage medium. And what I like about that is that that's going to give me that flexibility of moving my color. And so we have a couple of ways to do it. One, you can just go freehand. You can just start going in with a paintbrush, or you can take a stencil. Anytime you have texture paste, you can take that, and if you can find the grooves, there we go. You can line that back up to where, because it'll fit like in the grooves of your texture. You can place down your tag. Everything's going to kind of be in its own little spot, and you can go in. Let me just adjust this. There's my little petal. I have to see it in the, there we go. There's my little puzzle piece. Then you can go in and you can add your crayon. Now when we add the crayons, again, we can go in direct. I don't really like to do that. I will go in with my brushes. So do I have a set of brushes dedicated to crayons? Yes, I do. The same way I have them dedicated to my inks. I have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and brown, because that's just going to allow me to use my crayons. Once I use the crayons, I never go back to my ink pads with this brush unless you clean it, because you don't want to ever introduce pigment to that surface, right? You never want to put that crayon pigment on the surface of your ink pad. So I'll just put a little bit of water, just going to get that crayon to move that brush in, and that's going to allow me to go right through that stencil right onto the paste, and we can just do this with all of our colors of crayons. Just again, something different, something, and you're going to see, I'll lift this up. I won't do the whole thing. I won't bore you with my terrible coloring skills. But you'll see that just by going in and doing this little bit of texture around there, it creates that kind of soft, like fresco-y pastel look over something that you've stenciled, right? And because these aren't going to react, then I can ink my tag, or I could have done that ahead of time, right? Or you could still go in, if you love to color, if you're one of those colorers, you could certainly go in with any of your colors of crayon, make your palette, take a wet brush, pick this up, and you could go in and color right over that paste. The texture paste, the reason I did that is because the texture paste is porous. So unlike other pastes that are going to act as a resist, that will actually absorb the color the same way paper will. So if you like to go in and do detail, you can color with a brush, or you can stencil, and then we can ink the entire thing. Just a lot of great ways. The whole idea of this demo is understanding that flexibility of a water reactive pigment and how that moves. Okay, so let's do something else. Moving right along. Let's do a really quick collage. And by really quick collage, I just mean something that doesn't take a long time. I'm just using a bunch of different ideology stuff. There we go. These are salvage tags. They're all pre-printed, cool tags with some string. They've got just different stuff. We'll take some ephemera. Just opening a pack. I don't know what I'll grab. We'll do this little florist. That'll be cool. Assembly department, florist. I have no idea what's going on. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, you can tell you put a lot of thought into collage. I don't. Some do. That's fine. We'll do a photo booth. That's cool. These are great. Nice little photo strip. But maybe we'll just do this and maybe this guy. Maybe this dude's a florist. Yep, we're going to say that. So I'm just going to cut off the strip of that photo booth. I love how many different photos are on photo booth. Okay, those are my elements, right? So far, so good. Everybody see that? Great. Let's move some of this mess out of the way to get stuff into focus a little bit more. Let me cap my crayons. And
isn't it great when you just demo to yourself?
It is.
When you just get to go and keep on going and keep on going.
It is interesting, yeah. Well, because I don't, I guess at a show, you know, when people would just walk away, they'd be like, okay, he's boring me. I don't really notice that.
Because when you demo on Amazon, it's kind of like demoing to yourself.
Well, there's that. Okay. There could always be that, right? All right.
It's kind of the same.
Kind of the same. So here we're going to take some elements. We're going to take a tag. We're going to take some collage medium. And we're going to collage a tag. So I needed to clear this off because, as I mentioned, I like to do messy things on the craft mat because it'll wipe up. I'm going to take a brush, a collage brush. You can use a paint brush. I just happen to like the Distress brush just because of how it works. I'm going to dip that in. I'm going to apply a layer of collage medium. Let me get that little reinforcer. There you go. Just want that little hole out of there. I'll place that down. Now, Distress collage medium has a drying time of now. So once you put something down, like, I mean, well, it's just there. So just be okay with that. Then we're going to put a top layer on top of that. Just move that around. Let's put this guy down because he's going to be the assembler. There we go. Now if you need to get some under there, I didn't have any under that tag. Put that there. All right. Then we're going to take a little bit more. We're going to work down. So we're going to take some flowers. There we go. Yes, put that over the top. And you can include washi tape. You can really include whatever you want. and then cover that up with that florist. Okay. Perfect. Now that I've got that done, I'm going to take a layer of Collage Medium, brush it over the whole thing. Again, if you didn't want the lines, this is when you're going to go in and kind of smooth it out. Right? I don't mind the lines, but just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to do that. And that also allows you really to kind of press everything down, get out any air bubbles you may have done. But, you know, really when it comes to, in my opinion, when it comes to collage, thinking is overrated. Really is. Okay. So I'm just going to take a baby wipe, clean that off your fingers while it's wet. That's it. Where do you get the different color bands for your brushes? I just color on those with a Sharpie. So when you open up your brush, it reveals that ring. You see that ring? And I just take a Sharpie or something permanent and I just color. If you see closely, it is not good, but it works. Yeah, and that's all I did. And this way I was able to kind of identify that. If you're not going to use your brush for a while, you can wrap it in a baby wipe and it'll stay wet for a couple of hours. So you can go back and do more collage. I'm going to put this back in there. Okay. So once that's done, let me clean this goo off from there. We've got our collage tag. Now Collage Medium and everything else is going to come off with a dry paper towel or a baby wipe or a scraper from your craft mat. Easy, easy. If you get it on your glass, Collage Medium on your glass, you're going to want to use either hand sanitizer or a blade, but hand sanitizer will dissolve it. So there's our collage tag. You can see it's not totally dry yet, so we're going to dry it. Okay. Collage Medium is a heat-stable glue, so we can totally do that. Okay. So any kind of marks that you have, really, you can go in. I've even seen people like do paint around there, so any kind of permanent marker that you have. Okay, another thing about Collage Medium, once you warm this up, you're going to want to make sure that it dries and cools because it will always feel tacky while it's hot. So once I turn off that heat tool, I know it's dry because I touch it and it's not wet, so it's dry. But I'm just using my hand just to quickly cool it off on the glass. That's the other reason why I love working on a glass media mat. It's a great way to cool off what we have. So there we go. There's our tag. We don't see any of those weird little wet areas. And now we've got a substrate that is sealed. Okay, and here's why I want to do that. Because now we can go in with our crayons. We can have just a great time with color. We can take some of that crayon, we can smudge it out, just kind of move that color around. And you really have, and we can go right over the ephemera. Don't worry about it. I'll show you some different ways that we can kind of navigate around there. Let's see, what else do we have? We'll take a little fired brick. That'll be good. And I'm just moving this. So when I'm using this color, I'm kind of pushing it with my fingers. And you'll also notice that when I'm moving the color, I'm also changing my fingers. Because if I use the green over the red, it's going to turn it into brown. And then to clean, you're just going to wipe your fingers off onto a baby wipe or a wet paper towel, and it comes off. Because why? The crayons are water reactive. There you go. See? Once you know it, I'm telling you, it changes everything. And that's why I think demos are one of the most important things, is if you understand your product, everyone's going to have a different style, a different taste, a different use, a different skill level, really. There's people that could just, run circles around when it comes to coloring. Totally fine. And so that's why I think if you understand the product, then you just get to do you. You get to do the parts that you're going to like to do. So just going to move this color. So if you need color to move a little bit more, don't be afraid to take your finger. Remember, dab it on that baby wipe, right? Just like how we got that to come off. You'll get that crayon to move even more. Because sometimes if you put it on really thick, or in that case, that's one of those colors I was saying is a bit on the dry side. All right, now we need to grunge this up, because don't think for a second I'm going to leave it all rainbows and sunshine, because that's just not happening. I'm going to go in with some brown, and I'm using this just around some of the elements. Again, just scribbled it on there. Don't worry yet. We have a lot of ability to go in and fix things. Okay, but I do want to have a little bit more of a vintage vibe for me. And I like the fact that I can put that right on top of another color, and I can choose to either blend it out or I can choose to leave it a little heavier. So like on the edges, see on the bottom, I'm just leaving some of that there. But it doesn't mean I can't go back with another color. And that's what you always have to remember of the crayon. It really does give you the ability to always go back on top of things and just work that in. All right. So here's what I've got right now. A lot of this is going to go away, so don't worry about it. Just want to get a little bit more intensity there. So just use your fingers however that tool moves you. So see, I don't want it to go off the edge, so now I'm just kind of working that in, twisting that, just to get more intense color up there. There we go. Well, let's throw that. I'm going to throw just a little bit of red just down here, just for a little balance. Okay, done. So here's what we've got. A big old smudge fest. Now I got to get rid of that little dot in there. I want that to be something. So just take a little crayon and just move that in there. There we go. Okay, so once we have our crayons on there, here's what we can do. We can take and clean up any of this up. So see how I smudge the crayon over the top? That's going to allow me, just like what we did on that frame, I'm just going to take, this is a dry paper towel that I just put a little bit on a baby wipe, and that's going to allow me to go right over that paper. Why? Because we sealed it with Collage medium. And so that's why I'm not really worried about getting color where I don't want it, because I can clean off as much or as little as I want. So here I cleaned up the tag, but I left some of that schmutz down there because I liked it. You could go in and tint this guy. That's totally fine. But then we have the background, and the background's just fun because, well, it's a background. So you can take stencils and we can do the same idea that we were doing when we were cleaning it off, meaning we could take this, we could take a number, okay? And we could just do the same thing. I'm gonna take just a damp paper towel and I'm just gonna start wiping through the stencil. What? Yep, takes it off. Then maybe we wanna add some dots. I'll try with whatever. And I prefer to work with a paper towel because I just feel that it's not super juicy. Because I like the fact that I can control the fade, right? If everything is so wet and you get water underneath your stencil, then it becomes, well, it becomes a bit of a hot mess because water under your stencil is just going to seep around in your designs. And I like the mini stencils simply for scale. So like with Stampers Anonymous, I do both sizes of stencils. And so that's why it's all about scale. So there again, just going to go in and just, this one I just want it to kind of be more eroded because I don't want it to take off too much. And I'm just wiping through there. But, I mean, seriously, how quick is that? Super easy. Odd, weird, but cool. It could be embellished. It could even be cut apart and used for something else. You know, that's the other thing. Someone asked about a blending stump. I'm not sure because I don't use that because I have 10 blending stumps. So these to me just kind of work, but you could certainly try that. I just prefer to kind of feel that color being moved around. Now keep in mind when you do something like this, right? Anytime it's collage, this could be chopped off, right? If you want to put that on a card, cut that off, it could go on a card, or cut that off and use it for something else, or just take this area and use it. I think if you just play around on pieces of paper and don't treat them as something finished when you start, it will free up your creative process. And once you find your groove, well, then you could, apply this to a finished card or a tag or, do an envelope or whatever it is you're doing. But that's how easy it is to add color with a crayon. And you can see that the crayon provides vivid, bold, intense, bright color. Something totally different that a distress ink pad cannot do, or a spray stain, or a paint, or anything like that. That's why this medium exists. To me, it has the blendability like inks, the water reactive property like inks, but the intensity on a slick surface that inks don't provide me. And that is why I love the crayon. So let's take a look at this area right here. I want this to be a little bit more shabby chic. So I could take white, there's a picket fence crayon, and I love the ability to just go around that edge, and I'm just going to just kind of smudge it here and there. I don't do this to everything. You'll see in a second when I hold this up. The white is super intense, and so it just gives it like, when you see that like milky paint kind of shabby chic on stuff, that's what I love about a picket fence crayon. It's just going to add enough of that kind of antique-y look. It's a great way to highlight stuff. You see that? Just lightly smudged. So you can see I left some of it heavier, some lighter. You don't have to massage everything out. So that's why I was saying I like to use these as my blending stumps versus a tool, because I think a tool, you're not able to feel how much color you're moving. And it's important that when you're working with a medium like this, that you leave some little chunky bumpies around and you can smooth some of the stuff out. I think that adds to it, because see, when you look at it now, your eye pops to different intensities and it doesn't all look blended and harmonious. So that is what I like when it comes to working with crayons. A lot of fun, just a lot of fun to work with. So let's talk about sealing real quick. We don't have, I have a couple other things to do, and then I'll be good. So when it comes to working with this, let's just talk about some colors. You good, Mario? Sweet, good job, thanks. All right, we'll figure that out for next time. Eating up all my battery power. Okay, thanks guys, I appreciate those kind of words. I do, I love collaging, and I love not thinking about it. I do, I genuinely think that is probably the biggest pitfall of creativity is thinking. Yes, you have to think in a sense of knowing what works with what and what stuff you want to work with, but thinking is overrated. If you overthink every step of the way, you take the thrill out of it. It's not even that. Just everything you do is not fun because you're like, oh, what if I screw this up, or what if that's bad? Yeah, what if? Then you just chop it up and use it for something else. But having fun with it is like, that's the greatest part, okay? So next, let's say we wanted to seal the crayon. Okay, so I'm not going to demo this because I've demoed this before, but I'll just talk about this. This, when you touch it, is not going to come off. And the longer this dries, once this dries for, I would say, 30 minutes air time, 5 minutes heat tool, the crayon is going to go from like almost a waxy feel to totally smooth, because these crayons actually dry. As I mentioned, they can dry up, so they dry. And what's great about that is it leaves for a nice surface, and if you touch it, no matter how many times you touch it, the color is not going to move unless we already talked about licking it. But what if you wanted to seal it? I don't like sealing it because I think it takes away from this beautiful muted matte finish, but some people are just, they're chronic seal people and they want to seal it, but you can if you wanted to. So this was just a little demonstration I did. You could find it on my blog. If you search Distressed Crayons, you'll see a video of this. But this was just taking one of the hardcore art panels for alcohol ink or any kind of substrate, going in with some collage paper, right? Doing some collage on there with your collage medium, getting that black and white pattern. You could stamp on it if you want. And then once that dries, coloring with the crayons. And then what I did to seal it, you can see the difference in that finish. See how shiny that is? Compared to this tag, doesn't have any shine to it, okay? That shine is because it's sealed with resist spray. So resist spray allowed me to spray it over the top and just let it dry. It just sat there. So if I were to move it, then that resist spray would make those crayons go everywhere. But the fact that I was able to add a light mist of resist spray, let it dry or dry it with a heat tool, you can apply as many layers as you want, and you can actually see here where there's a lighter layer of resist spray, and then I went a little heavier to make this shine, and you can see that it actually made the colors super vivid. So not only does it seal it, but it really intensified the colors. That's always an option. If that's really your thing, you can play around with that. And now this is, it doesn't matter how wet this gets or whatever, those colors are forever sealed under that resist spray, because resist spray will act as a sealer as well. So just something cool to play around with, especially for people that, want to make something that's going to be, more decorative, home decor, certainly not dishwasher safe, but you could use it and wipe it off and you don't have to worry about any of that color running, right? And so you could seal a tag or whatever you wanted. I just wanted to give you that option that when you're playing with crayons, play around with the resist spray. It's pretty cool. All right. So one last thing that I'll share, and then we're going to go into some questions. And this really ties back to tinting of the paper dolls, right? So this year for Ideology, we launched this layer SKU called engravings. And what they are a whole variety of black and white printed art, these old engraving art designs from, fish and flowers and dress forms and palettes and flowers and people in cars and all sorts of odd things. And these are designed to color. Now, you can go in with your markers. You could take your distress markers, or you could even try it with Copics, because it is a coated surface, just like paper dolls. This is made out of paper doll material, if you will. So it is that same cardstock with that coating on one side. So you saw, obviously, when I'm working on coloring, that I was kind of having a challenge because unlike paper dolls, these don't have any undertone, right? So these don't have any clothing or shadow or whatever. So if you have a brush stroke, well, you're going to see it, and that may not be your thing. Now, Tammy B, she did a great, I think she just shared it on Instagram the other day as well. She did a great make using these engravings with crayons, and she was super successful. I, on the other hand, was not successful. So that means I needed to figure out a way that I could be, okay? Or at least in my own mind could be. So here is what I have, right? So I have a flower, right? And this flower, this is one of the engravings. Now you can see on this side, I have a nice kind of blended, what I think is blended, almost just looks more like just a nice coloring, right? This side, well, it still looks like a hot mess because you can see my brush strokes. You'll also notice that this side is somewhat shiny. This side, not shiny. Huh, what's up with that? Well, the other thing is that half and half, let's say I take a little bit of water and I go in. What? Half the color stayed on, the other half the color comes off, and it could come off all the way on this side. This side, no. Why? What happened? Well, here's what I had to figure out. And when I say I had to figure out, I figured this out this morning. Right, Mario?
You do.
Because that's how I roll. Because when something gets me, I'm like, I am going to figure it out. So last time, in one of the earlier demos, I demoed the importance of embossing powders with crayon and how they impacted this. And that if you emboss something with clear embossing powder, it would act as a resist because, right, it's going to be shiny and that crayon is going to come off over the top. It's the same idea that we did with the glaze, right? That once we had that shiny embossing powder, in this case it was tinted, that when I went over it, the crayon would come off. So that's what this one was. It just happened to be clear embossing powder that I stamped. This is how my brain works. I just try things. But Ranger has an embossing powder that I love, and I've used it many, many times. I've done it for a faux chalkboard technique, and it's called Frosted Crystal. And Frosted Crystal is a clear embossing powder that when you melt it, it becomes, say it together now, Frosted Crystal. That's right. And it creates a frosted, textured effect, unlike a smooth plastic effect that you would get with clear powder. And so this is showing what crayon looks like over frosted crystal. It actually has tooth, and so it grabs onto that crayon and it doesn't come off. It holds that. And I was like, this was cool. This idea was just like, okay, what if I did, collage medium under there, then emboss with frosted crystal? Would the color only stick to the embossing and not the paper? Well, there's your answer, because there's my finger of collage medium first, stamped and embossed, and you can see that the frosted crystal holds the crayon. So that idea, that thought process was like, well, hold on. If it works there, what if I covered an entire piece with frosted crystal? Could I then watercolor it? And would it blend on frosted crystal and still have the same properties as this idea did? And the answer is yes. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to take a small piece, really. I should pick something that is probably the same color. But we'll do a rose, okay? I don't know why I'm so flowery today. I could be a lot of things, but that's because I can just use more colors. All right. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to work with frosted crystal embossing. This is just a clear embossing powder. We're going to use embossing dabber. Now again, it could be an ink pad that you smush down. It could be a pen, anything that's going to get this powder to stick, and we want it to be clear. And I'm running out of wax paper. There we go. All right, I got one. So we're going to take our embossing dabber, slick surface, so super, super simple to go over the top of, and just lightly, just put that over. You don't need a lot. So that's what I love about the dabber. It applies such a nice amount of that. All right, so frosted crystal, put that over the top, pick this up. So this would also work on a paper doll, right? So if you struggle like I do about tinting your paper dolls and getting them to stick, well then you could apply this frosted crystal to a paper doll. And not only that, but then it would make that the crayon does not come off with water. Now why isn't it coming off with water, you might be asking? That's because the frosted crystal, as I mentioned, is providing tooth. It's basically providing all these little raised bumps, and the color is sitting inside it and you can't get to it, right? You might be able to scrub it out or something, but you're not going to be able to really get to it. Okay, back to the squeezers. Now that I have them, I'm probably just going to leave these out, because as you can see, I've got a very small detailed piece and I don't have much room to hold it, but these will allow me to honestly just squeeze and grab a little bit of it and hold it. So I'm going to emboss this. So you can see right now that it's frosted, but it is not embossed. Now the thing to remember about frosted crystal, once it turns clear, you need to be done, okay? Because if you overheat frosted crystal, it will become shiny. So just watch the design and you'll see that once the black appears, see that? See how quick that is? You're done, move on. So when you're using frosted crystal, once you see the black design, you are finished. That's it, right? Don't go over it 2 or 3 times just for good measure, because we want it to be frosted. And you can see here that now it is matte. It doesn't even have that shine of that other piece because it's been frosted. And it's that quick because it's an embossing powder that's just going to melt. It has a very, very short melt time. It's just super quick, okay? So next I'm going to go in and color. Well, I use that term loosely. I'll take some crayons, scribble this on here. Maybe we'll take, oh gosh, let's throw in some aged mahogany. Let's be bold. All right. And we'll go in and add some greens. I'll even add a little crushed olive. Such a good color. Crushed olive is like a greeny, yellowy color. All right. Now this one, we can just watercolor like normal because we're working on a surface. We're working on like a wet surface that we can pick up color. Now, can you color directly on here? Yes, and I'll show you that as well. Actually, I want something a little bit, man, I cannot wait for a kitsch crayon. It's just saying, oh, let's do a little, I'll do just a touch of festive berries, right? Because I can just mix these colors for now and just pick up some color. All right, is this going to allow me to pick up some color and just keep placing that in? And even if you go into like a darker color, let's get that color fluid, okay? We're just going to put that color right in to the area. And as you're going in and adding color, you really have, this is giving you like all this open time to just go in and kind of blend that color, right? And just clean off your brush. So as I want more color, I can just literally dab it into that area and it's going to stay. And once it's there, you still have you can still go in and kind of move some of that around if you want. But I found that if you try to color directly over the frosted crystal, you get a lot of color in there. And like I said, it'll grab, but then it's really a challenge to kind of get this effect, get it to blend out. Because if you try to get it to blend out, it's just not going to want to do that because you have too much color in that area. Okay, so next I'll go into some greens here. And let's just apply that. So even over the black, because we're dealing with a pigment, you're going to see some of that green really likes to sit on the surface because we've applied that frosted crystal. And just add some other tones of green. There we go. We want something that's a little, a little pop, a little shadow, a little light. We can go with just a little bit of yellow just to add some. And then I'll go back to some pink and just kind of blend that in. So we just get a little bit more of just a little light touch. Again, nothing spectacular, but take a look at that. Super simple way to go in and watercolor onto those engravings. And that color is there. It's in there. Really, really simple. So that to me is one of the things that, again, if you've struggled with a water brush and crayon over one of the slick surfaces, then just applying that layer of frosted crystal is going to be, well, everything you need. I think that to me is, I don't know, I love it. So there are a million things really that we can do with crayons. This only scratches the surface, but understanding their properties, understanding that whole kind of blendability factor, that they are water reactive. They can smudge on a dry surface, but they smudge better on a coated or a sealed surface. They're great when you want to put them into texture, right? Like Crackle or something embossed. Doing collage work with that is really good. Doing overlays with that, or of course, tinting paper dolls. But whatever you work with the crayons, it's just about playing. And these work great with the other distress mediums. So these work great on top of an ink line. This works great on top of, and when I say ink line, I mean like ink pad, re-inker, sprays, any of the inks. Oxides, it works great with paint. It's just a lot of fun when you're working with different mediums and you're like, okay, so you have an inked background. Oh, hey, I really want to get some color to stick out, but if I go in with more ink, it's just going to turn to mud. Well, then you go in with crayons. Okay, well, how do I apply those? Well, you can apply them with a water brush, like we did. You can apply it with a blending brush, like we did to get this dry look, or you can apply them direct, right? If you had a layer of collage medium. So understanding those properties and playing around with different things is really what I hope to inspire you.